Our next presentation is Steve Niemela. He is our local Oregon Fish and Game biologist. He has actually been a big part of putting this workshop together, and I think he's got a good presentation for you, so I'm going to pass it over to you and move on. Thank you.
So first of all, thank you for everybody for being here. I know there are a lot of different people out there with different points of view. We appreciate all of you coming. We're really happy to have the livestock producers here. These non-lethal techniques, the main point is to get this information out to you folks who can actually use it on the ground. So thanks to everybody for coming. I just wanted to touch a little bit more on Bob and Phyllis Mace. They did provide the funding, or their foundation provided the funding for the event here tonight. One quick note about them: Bob was an employee of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. He actually coined the phrase watchable wildlife, which is now just spread across the country and is in our popular vernacular, but we're pretty proud of that. One of the things that's interesting is that he was an ODFW employee. He was also had interest in the aggregate industry. And so right now, there is aggregate being mined that's going to create a deep water reservoir on the valley floor here. That money is being funded into a fund that supports watchable wildlife, including this conference here today. What I think is really interesting about that is, obviously aggregate is an extraction industry, but the benefits from that in this area are helping right now with watchable wildlife. Also, all the fishing ponds that are here around the expo that all our local kids use, those ponds were created during the creation of I-5. So again, another example of an extraction industry being used to do some good things for wildlife and fish resources. So, and I know all of you that are producing livestock, you know, you're pulling product out of the ground to bring to our tables, and I know a lot of you also view yourselves as stewards of the land. And I've gotten to know some of you and really been able to appreciate that perspective more. So anyway, just a thanks again to Bob and Philip Mace, their foundation. Their daughter, Linda Marr, is on the foundation with me. So just real quick detail and thanks to them. I'm going to talk about implementing the Oregon Wolf Management Plan that Commissioner Finley discussed earlier, how we're actually implementing that on the ground. So I'm going to talk about the policy and legal status of wolves, a little bit about pack distribution, but I'll probably mostly just skip over that. John covered that really well. I'll talk about the context and importance of non-lethal deterrence, and then a little bit about conflict, and when all these things fail and we have to do an investigation on dead livestock, what that looks like. So Oregon's Wolf Conservation and Management Plan. The main goal for this plan has essentially two parts. The first is to ensure the conservation of wolves. So we shouldn't make any mistake about that. The plan in Oregon is to conserve the gray wolf and to see that animal more broadly distributed throughout the state. But there's a second part to that goal that we don't want to miss, and that is to do that in a way while protecting the social and economic interests of Oregonians. And that's why we're having this workshop today. It's part of our obligation to fulfill that, trying to get some tools out there to protect your ability to raise livestock and have profitable operations. So wolves in Oregon, the Wolf Management Plan essentially divides the state into two zones. We have the Eastern Wolf Management Zone and a Western Wolf Management Zone. So the Eastern Wolf Management Zone now has met the population target for what we call the management phase of the plan. The plan's divided into three phases based on how many wolves are on the landscape. So over in Eastern Oregon, they obviously have a lot more wolves than we do. They have had at least seven breeding pair for 3 consecutive years. So they're now in phase 3 of the Wolf Management Plan. Over here in Western Oregon, we are in phase 1 of the Wolf Management Plan. The only breeding pair in moving through these different phases is all based on how many breeding pairs of wolves you have. A breeding pair of wolves is 2 wolves that have successfully produced offspring, and that offspring, at least 2 of them, have survived to the end of the calendar year. So we have historically one breeding pair in Western Oregon. We may be having another in the Indigo Pack. We'll have to see what happens with that. But so we're pretty far short of the goal of having 4 breeding pair for 3 consecutive years here. So we are in phase 1 of our wolf management plan. And of course, nothing can ever be completely simple, so the federal management has a different boundary than what our management has. So basically the far eastern portion of the state, that's where wolves have been completely delisted. So we have a portion of the state that's in phase 3 of our management plan, and they've also been federally delisted. But the take-home message for everybody in the room here today is that we in Western Oregon are in part of the state where we're in phase 1 of the wolf management plan. And that's important because it has implications for how we manage wolves. But even more important than that, right now, we are under full federal protection of the Endangered Species Act. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, really, they're the lead agency in Western Oregon when it comes to wolves. We work very closely with them, collaboratively, in implementing our plan and meeting their goals for their wolf recovery. And I gotta say, I just can't give enough credit both to Wildlife Services and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for the amount of time and energy they have put into helping livestock producers deal with some of these issues as they have come up. It's been really incredible, the maintenance on the fladry, the night patrols, and just the dedication they've shown is really something to be remarked on. So we are in a situation where wolves are continuing to spread throughout the state of Oregon, to the point where, as I mentioned, we have 4 breeding pairs, or over 7 breeding pairs of wolves in the eastern management zone. But when we hit 4 breeding pairs for 3 consecutive years, the state of Oregon made the decision to delist the wolf at a statewide level, and that's something the commissioner spoke about earlier. So we have this unusual situation where the state of Oregon has delisted the wolves across the whole state, and then we have this kind of bifurcated federal management based on where you are. But with all that, the main point really is that wolves are doing quite well. Every year we have more wolves in Oregon than we had the year before. They continue to spread geographically. The breeding pairs that we use to really measure our goalposts in terms of wolf recovery, every year we have more breeding pairs as well. So wolves, left to their own devices, are doing pretty well recolonizing Oregon. I just want to hit, and I'm going to skip over this pretty quickly, but just to echo what John said, there was no relocation of wolves into the Cascades, into southern Oregon. We have a lot of GPS data, we have a lot of genetic data showing linkages to, like John said repeatedly, mostly the Imnaha pack. But also we have, we've documented areas of known wolf activity throughout the state. Again, the majority of them are in the northeast corner of the state. Our breeding pair, our area of known wolf activity here is associated with the road pack. John mentioned, and it's been pretty fascinating to watch, but it does appear now as if wolves have made it all the way from the introductions in the Rocky Mountains all the way over to the Pacific Ocean. In terms of barriers, he talked about biobarriers, fladry. It seems at this point the Pacific Ocean does seem to be an effective barrier to their western movement. So that's good. We are seeing them expand throughout the state. That is the goal. That is the plan. Wolves are here to stay. So that is working well towards those conservation goals. Now, just to reiterate, these are some of the travel paths of wolves that they've dispersed throughout the state, and really throughout the Pacific Northwest. You can see Oregon, California, Washington there. These wolves are capable of making tremendous movements. The average dispersing movement of a wolf in Oregon is 117 miles. And that's just the average. So we have some of these wolves, like OR7 that in the green line there, that just make incredible journeys. And OR7, of course, like John said, not the only one. OR44 made a similar journey until his caller died in California. But the main point, I want to reiterate what John said, we don't know everything about what's going on with wolves. The counts that we have are a minimum count. Another thing we often hear about is your counts are way underestimating wolves. And to some extent that's true because we are only basing our information on the minimum amount of known individual animals. So that takes a certain level of evidence to show that packs are different packs. But the point I really want to make here is that this is an opportunity for all of you folks to help us. If you Google ODFW wolf reporting form, you're going to have opportunity to give us information on any of your wolf observations. Importantly, if you have game cameras out there and you have a picture of a wolf, that whether it's because you're monitoring a salt block or something for your cattle operation, or because you're a hunter and you find a wolf out in the field, please send us that information. You go onto the ODFW wolf reporting form, you can actually upload pictures right to that site. If for whatever reason you're not a computer person, and we're finding out from our electronic licensing system that a lot of people are not computer people, you can give me a call and we'll just help you work through it and get that information into the system. So I want to talk a little bit about how we help resolve conflict under phase 1. Now, most of this right now is subordinate to the federal listing, the federal endangered species protection. But I just want to go through it because that's what we do. This is our plan for the state of Oregon. And also, there is a delisting rule underway right now. We don't know how that's going to turn out. But probably at some point, it might be years from now, it might be sooner, we will have federally delisted wolves at some point. So just to go through it, the first thing we do when we have an area that wolves are working is identify an area of known wolf activity. So we set up a perimeter. In this case, it goes all the way from Prospect Butte Falls over to Fort Klamath, including the Rogue Siskiyou National Forest and the Sky Lakes Wilderness area. So that's the first thing we do. Once we start having conflict with wolves, wolves are confirmed to be killing livestock, we create an area of depredating wolves. Now, in the case of the rogue pack, because they have killed animals in eastern Jackson County, killed livestock, eastern Jackson County, and Fort Klamath, the whole AQUA, or area of known wolf activity, I'm in the government, we love our acronyms. So, because they've killed animals throughout that whole zone, the whole thing is an area of depredating wolves. Once that happens, there's another step. We have to come up with a conflict deterrence plan. So we've established one of those for the rogue pack. There's actually copies of it on the back table if you would like. That is actually going to, in brief form, have all of the non-lethal techniques that you're going to hear about for the rest of the day. So I'd recommend picking up one of those. And some of you may have received that already, because when we have an event happen, we generate this deterrence plan and we mail it out to any of the addresses and groups that we have on file for livestock producers in that area. So once that's done, we're hoping people are on the ground implementing non-lethal techniques. But if depredations continue, ODFW has the ability to determine to classify a pack as a chronic depredating pack. And what that means is that they've committed 4 qualifying depredations in a six-month period. So that means that there's a number, 4, and that it has to occur within a certain time frame. So the qualifying word is a really good one to spend a little time talking about. A qualifying an event is, first of all, it's an event. So if you have 4 animals killed by a pack of wolves in one night, that doesn't immediately turn them into a chronically depredating pack. An event is one isolated event in sort of space and time. So if they're separated by distance or separated by time, they could be classified as different events. Also, in order for something to qualify, attractants have to be removed. So if you have a carcass, a bone pile, or something on your property, and you've already had conflict with wolves, and we come out and we confirm and say, yes, a wolf is responsible for this new carcass. If you still have that bone file, that known attractant, that depredation, even though we're confirming it, won't count as a qualifying depredation towards the definition of chronic. So you also have to be implementing at least one non-lethal technique. So all these things that I'm talking about, they're not only in our Oregon Wolf Management Plan, but they're also have been adopted in administrative rules. So these are things that, these are not flexible. These are the rule of the land as pertaining to Oregon law. Once all of that has happened, and hopefully we don't want to get to this point, but if we've done all we can with the non-lethals, we've removed the bone piles, we've tried the flagella, we've done everything, ODFW does have the ability to go to lethal removal. There's a lot of process involved in that, but we have done it in Eastern Oregon, the portion of the state where they're not listed. So, but that is one of the things, actually all ODFW damage policy always starts with non-lethal, whether we're talking about cougars or bears or whatever, and we proceed kind of systematically to lethal, trying to avoid it as an option. But it is a tool that's out there in the wolf management plan. So it's just something to keep in mind. The main thing I want to say right now is that lethal removal is definitely not an option if the non-lethal things have not been done first. So another tie-in in terms of the non-lethal is the compensation committee. You've already heard from Randy. There's some other members of that compensation committee here. Their job is essentially to approve the Oregon Department of Agricultural grant, make an application to ODA to reimburse people that have suffered livestock loss. That's one of their roles. Their other role is to pursue funding for these non-lethal resources, and they've done a really good job of it. Having this workshop today is one of the steps fulfilling that obligation. And I have to say, I have now seen wolf committees set up in 3 different counties. The one that you have in Jackson County right now, I think, is the best that I've seen so far. ODFW isn't on the committee, we're just advisory to the committee, but these folks are really trying hard, they're really working hard on your behalf. ODFW has 2 roles. We confirm depredations and we delineate those areas of known wolf activity. We kind of have a 3rd role, which is to provide some technical guidance as well. So again, to kind of reiterate what John said, this graph here, the orange bars are the minimum wolf population size in Oregon. The white bars are the confirmed depredations. And what the point I want to make here is that the rate at which the wolf population is increasing is a lot higher than the rate at which the confirmed depredations is increasing. And I think that's a testament to the folks in Eastern Oregon that are already implementing some of these non-lethal techniques. It also speaks to the fact that not every pack is a depredating pack. Now, we have a situation here where the only pack breeding pair that we have in Western Oregon is a depredating pack. So in our little myopic view in just managing my watershed, 100% of our packs are depredating, but we only have the one. When you zoom out and look at the state as a whole, actually most wolf packs in Oregon are not depredating packs. So the orange bar represents all the packs for a given year. The yellow bar represent the number of packs that are depredating. And you can see in most years, most wolf packs, most wolves are not depredating on cattle. But of course it does happen, and the rogue pack has been a particularly problematic group of wolves in terms of livestock loss. In 2018, they were responsible for 11 of the 28 depredations that occurred in Oregon. I think, so to put that in context, I think that's 39% of all of the depredations that occurred across the state occurred here with the rogue pack. And keep in mind how many wolves we have over in Northeast Oregon. So just again, making the point that we have a bad situation here in Jackson County, but most wolf packs throughout the state are not depredating packs. So a little bit of information on how wolves kill. There will be some more of this later on. This is mostly in the context of trying to identify wolves as being the culprit in a livestock loss. So wolves bite, they kill. This is going to sound silly, but I'll explain it a little bit more. Wolves kill by biting animals to death. So, okay, all predators basically kill by biting animals to death, right? But the way wolves do it is through multiple bites. They're not like a cougar that comes and might either puncture the skull or crack the vertebrae right at the base of the neck. They're not like a bear that might drag an animal down and just start consuming it. They're a coursing predator. They get their prey to run, they run alongside the prey, and they start biting at the animal. And so you end up with some characteristic markings on the animal. The other thing, wolves' teeth are not particularly sharp. Sometimes they can kill animals without breaking the skin. That's unusual, but the point is the damage they're causing is because of crushing the underlying muscle tissue. So here's a picture of a cow that's been attacked. Wolves, like I said, they attack in very characteristic locations as they're running along. Back of the leg, front of the leg, back of the front leg, along the flank, the groin, the anus. Those are all areas that are vulnerable to attack and bite as the prey is running along. So what they do is they're going to be biting and releasing, biting and releasing, biting and releasing. But when they do that, they're actually crushing the muscle tissue underneath the skin. Wolves' teeth, although not sharp, are very broad. So you're going to see very broad bite tooth scrapes up to a 1/4 inch wide. That's very different. Most of you have probably seen coyote kills. It's not going to be that light scraping. It's going to be a pretty thick swamp. The other thing, just to show you, some of our biologists refer to the damage that's caused to that underlying muscle tissue as grape jelly. That's kind of what it looks like. That muscle tissue can be completely pulverized. And again, if you look at that animal, you can see that kind of distinctive bite pattern right along the back of the leg. So when we're doing these investigations, one thing that we have to see in order to qualify something as wolves, or really any predator being involved, is pre-mortem hemorrhage. So wolves will certainly feed on carcasses. In addition to being a predator, they can also be a scavenger. So just because you've seen a wolf feeding on a carcass doesn't mean the wolf killed that carcass or killed that animal. And so that's the challenge for us, is to have enough physical evidence in place to be able to determine what the factor was. So what can you do if you suspect a depredation? Some folks in the room have had experience with this already. The first thing I'd ask you to do is consider why you think a wolf was involved, right? So we've had a real problem with the rogue pack. It's been a real issue this year and last year. But coyotes, cougars, bears, other animals, bobcats are still our lead predator on livestock and throughout the rogue watershed. So you have familiar with these other species. What's the reasoning for thinking it's a wolf? So just spend some time, think about that. But if you do think it's a wolf, then contact us as soon as possible, because we're going to be able to do an investigation. What you can do, what you can do after that is really try and preserve the evidence. Is it raining? Is it going to get to be nighttime before we can get out there? Are there scavengers on the carcass? It's amazing how much evidence vultures and ravens and other scavengers can destroy. So cover it up with a tarp, weight it down. If you have a fox light, if we've had depredations in the area, maybe put that on there. If you have a little battery-powered radio that can have a human voice out there, do that. A flashlight you can turn on. Something to change the appearance and protect that carcass before we can get out there. Write down your observations. It's really been good for me to get to interact with some of you and just understand the depth of how you understand how your animals are using the landscape. Did you see changes in your animal's behavior? When was the last time you saw the dead animal alive? Was it last night, or was it 3 weeks ago? How were your livestock behaving when you got out there? Were all the cattle balled up? Are they now in another pasture they had to break through a fence to get to, and they don't usually do that? Did you hear wolves howling? Are there tracks present? Sometimes there's situations we've gone out where it's raining, and the landowner would tell us, well, there's blood here, but if it's been raining, we might not see it by the time we get there. So if you can take photographs or cover something up with a bucket, that's all very helpful. This might be the hardest thing that we ask you to do throughout the presentation today, and that's to reserve judgment if you can. So we're going to get out there, we're going to do our investigation. Most of the time people already have an opinion formed, and that's fine, but to the extent that you can kind of hold off and just think about it from other perspectives, that's helpful for us and ultimately probably for you as well. What can you expect from us? So a lot of times we come up with conclusions that perhaps the livestock owner doesn't like. They have a different opinion of what happened, and it creates some conflict. And some of that is inevitable. It's always hard for me when that happens, but it does happen. But there are some expectations that you can have for us. One is we're going to respond in as timely a fashion as we can. In the winter, I left most federal holidays. It seemed like it was federal holidays and Sundays that wolves attacked on, and they also figured out when my 5-year-old's birthday party was. But anyway, so we try and get out there just as quickly as we can, because we know whatever inconvenience for us, it's very minimal to the inconvenience that you folks are being put under when this happens. So the other thing is we do investigations at your request. So some point when we're out there, I might awkwardly turn to you and say, are you asking us to do an investigation? And it might be a very weird, formal way for me to put it, but sometimes it's unclear if people actually want us to do an investigation. And we're not going to touch your livestock until we know we have your full permission to do that. So we always ask that. We have an evidence-based process. everything that I put in my report is going to be backed up by a picture of something that I took, or a note that I wrote down on the scene from talking to you. So everything's going to be evidence-based. You'll be surprised at the detail of evidence we take. We photograph everything. We skin the entire carcass. We've now actually started shaving the entire carcass and then skinning the entire carcass. And we take pictures of every mark on the animal that we can find. So we collect voluminous data. And that is one of the reasons we make sure we get your permission before we start skinning the animal. The other thing that can sometimes cause us some frustration is we do not make a determination standing out there on the ground. Sometimes it can be, it's sort of a heat of the moment thing. So we're going to collect all of our evidence, we're going to go back, we're going to review it, we're going to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. We're going to work with our collaborators, whether that's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or USDA Wildlife Services. We're going to contact our wolf program back in LeGrand and get their input on it. In the end, we're going to come out with a determination that's either confirmed, probable, possible unknown, or other. And confirmed basically means we have concluded that wolves were involved in this depredation. Probable means we can't quite confirm it, but the highest probability is that wolves were involved. And then possible unknown is when we have a situation where wolves may have been involved. Perhaps you saw a wolf on the carcass, but we're not able to 100% determine or even say it's most likely that it was a wolf. Most of the time, not always, but often these are cases where either the landowner did not find the carcass for a week, or maybe they found it and didn't think to call us for a time, but in these cases often, most of the evidence is gone. It's a situation where we might literally have just some bones, or maybe some skin and bones. But occasionally there's situations, if we have the right patch of skin, has the right tooth marks on it, we can confirm pre-mortem hemorrhage, we might be able to confirm from just a very small amount of evidence. Usually that's not the case. If we have skin and bones, it's really going to be hard for us to make a probable or confirmed determination. And then other are those situations where we've had depredations and there's essentially no physical sign on the carcass that wolves were involved. And these can also be controversial because there can be kind of external information that would make you think wolves were involved, but we need to have physical evidence basically on the carcass to be able to confirm it for the most part. So that's it for my talk today. There's my contact information. Again, I am your local district wildlife biologist, our office out there on Central Point. If you have any problems, give us a call. If you want a wolf livestock loss investigation, we'll get somebody out there to take a look at it. And with that, I probably don't have time for questions. So I'm gonna, is that correct? Yep. Just one? Is there any questions? We're running a little behind, so. Okay, one question.
So, is there any thoughts about why there are fewer actual predations given the volume or the number of wolves in Eastern Oregon? Does it have to do with what's available for wildlife versus livestock?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One, wolves aren't just naturally depredating. I think their primary food source is still going to be those natural prey species. In the right situations, when there's vulnerabilities, when wolves have been observing livestock for a long time, that's where we can start to see the transition into depredation. The other thing is that people are using these non-lethal techniques, and hopefully that is partially contributing to keeping those numbers down.
Thank you.